Welcome back. I'm going to make another video about turning pens. And this one again using the standard 7mm kit, but taking care of a couple of features about the standard kit that I don't prefer. One, I don't like them joined dead in the center. So I'm going to move the joint between the turning portion that drives the mechanism and the body to a lower point in the assembly. Second thing, I don't like seeing the clip as visible as it is, so I'm going to partially hide it. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's some samples I've made before. What I've done is glued the lower brass tube into a short piece of dark wood and extend the hole up into the larger body, but not glued in. The body piece will be glued in its normal manner, but with a piece of dark wood again on the top of it. So that when the kit is put together and the clip is assembled, it'll be partially hidden. Now I need a little larger hole on top of that to accommodate the diameter of this clip. So I have taken a pinned barrel trimmer and I ground the shaft of it way down so that it'll just fit into here to the depth I want and to the diameter to allow that clip to be totally buried. And then when I assemble the pieces, I'll probably put a small piece of veneer between the dark and light on the top and cut it at a slight angle to, again, increase the, change the look of it a little bit. Here's how I'm going to do it. Let me take you through the steps. Well, first thing, I'm going to pick two pieces of wood, dissimilar colors, dark for the tips, top and bottom, light for the body. So I'm marking out how long of a piece I need for the tip and the top, and how long of a piece I need for the body. I'm going to cut the top portion of the dark wood, maybe just a little bit long, and trim it back later. So let's go to the bandsaw. Cut the pieces off. First the top, and then the piece for the tip near the nib of the pen. The last thing I'm going to do is to take the light wood, which I'm using for the body, and trim it to length. That being done, the next thing I need to do is to cut the angle on the top portion and the body portion so that I can glue them together at that angle that creates a nice look for the pen. I'm using a sled to cut it at a 15-degree angle, just trimming the ends to 15 degrees light, and then trimming the dark also at 15 degrees. Table saw blade cuts very clean. And so when I join these two together with glue, I think I'll get a really nice, solid joint. I've made a tray that allows me to put the pieces in alignment and clamp them. The tray has been lined with a piece of plastic that has been rubbed with some wax to keep the glue from sticking. I'm aligning the joints so that the pieces push inward when they're clamped. You can go either direction, but this aids the clamping just a little bit. A clamp on the top, clamp on the bottom, simply to hold them into place. And then another clamp I'm going to place across the ends to pull the joint tight together. And this is just standard Tide Bond original yellow wood glue. I know I'm joining end grain to end grain. So I'm going to now go back, trim that excess off of the top. I made it a little extra long. Probably didn't need to, but I did. And that's just a piece of waste. Now there's my blank. The yellow, the dark, and the light are lined up, but they're not necessarily exactly the same dimension. So I'm going to my disc sander simply to square the edges up so that the blank is lined dark and light together. Just create that joint so it looks nice and smooth all the way around. I hope that'll aid in the next step of drilling the hole through the blanks. There's the two pieces I'm going to build the kit from. So I do almost all of my work, drilling, turning obviously, and assembly at the lathe. I find it's a safe, aligned way to do things, and it gives me a lot of control. So I'm going to use a 4-jaw chuck, what I call number 1 jaws, to grab the blanks squarely, and Jacob's chuck in the tailstock for drilling. Also, I can control the speed down to reasonable RPMs, generally someplace around 500, although I don't have a digital display to tell me that. I'm going to start the drilling very slowly. I want the bit to bite squarely into the center of the blank, and then once it has purchase, I can advance it, allowing the chips to clear. This is a short blank, so it shouldn't be too difficult to drill it out. Now for the longer blank, it's going to be a little bit more complicated because it is a longer blank. And so what I'm going to do is put it in the jaws that start exactly the same way. Being a long blank, any misalignment will cause the piece to be drilling a hole at a wrong angle. It needed to be lined up. I fixed that. Now I'm going to start drilling precisely the same way. I'm using my 7mm drill bit. This is a fairly short one I'm using. And I'm going to take a series of cuts, plunge cuts, and go about as far as that bit will allow me. But since I need to go a long distance in this blank, I'm going to switch this bit out for a longer one. The longer one allows me deeper cuts, but it's also, by being longer, tends to be a little bit more flexible, and it's not a good bit to start with. So what I now can do is place it into the hole that has already been started. It gives me the alignment, and at this point I then simply can walk the bit rest of the way through the blank. It's important to do the plunge cutting. The chips, if they build up in the flutes of the drill bit, can push it offline a little bit. All the way through, put the bits away. Now I've made a special fixture here. This is a pin mill used for squaring the ends of blanks. I've grounded down so that the diameter will allow me to drill a hole in the top of the blank sufficient to bury the outside diameter of the clip. You'll see that later. But right now I'm just expanding that hole to a dimension for the clip to be partially hidden. It's not a very good drill bit, but it doesn't have to go too far. You can see how the flute's packed up with sawdust and chips. Well, that's its one purpose, is to do that one particular activity. That's what the hole looks like. I've just drilled it down far enough that I can set the clip down in that location at the very end. So now back to the bench, and to glue the pieces together. I'm going to glue the first tube into the short blank, but I'm measuring how much wood is going to be glued to the brass. And I'm only roughing up that portion of the brass that will be glued and buried into that piece of wood. The other end I'm leaving shiny because I want it to be able to slide easily into the body. So that's about how far it has to go. I'm going to put glue on that brass that has been roughed up, and I'm going to insert it into the blank last. In other words, the unglued portion goes in first. So what I'm doing now is sticking it in from that end. Now, any glue that's expressed outward will be on that end where I can easily clean it up. The end with the brass tube, it's very difficult to get in there and re-square that if there had been any squeeze out at that location. So inserting the other brass tube into the second blank is really simple. I'm going to stick it in from the top end and press it down to the bottom of that larger hole so that it seats in the normal place, and when I mount the clip later on, it will seat to the level I want it. I'm using a medium thick CA glue. It's a brand new bottle, so I've got to be careful to work fairly rapidly. This glue will set very quickly. Walk it down in, and I need a device that'll push it down below the surface and down to where the bottom of that pocket has been set. Okay. Done. Both pieces have been glued in. Now before I can turn, I want to go to the disc sander again and use my angled fixture to allow me to square off these ends, and they're squared off to the tube, to the brass tube inside. This will allow the pieces, when they're butted together, to align properly. Probably don't need to do this end because it's going to be sanded back to a shape later on, but I might as well do it while I'm here. You can see the angle at which I glued the two pieces. You'll also note that I forgot to put the veneer in that I promised I would do. Oversight, but for demonstration purposes, you get the idea. Now this is the tip where the nib is going to be installed, and you can see I can flatten it very easily. But because of the brass tube sticking out the other end, it's almost impossible to go back to that end. So it needed to be flat from the very beginning. This fixture has been made in such a way that it's at 90 degrees to the disc in all different planes. There's my parts. That's the way it's going to go together when we turn it, which is now. 7mm standard bushing, nib end, brass tube slides up inside of the body freely. I've taken and made another bushing, one that will fit down inside of that hole. Gives me support against the end of the brass tube in the way that a standard bushing on a normal kit would do. So everything's assembled, and from now on, the turning and the shaping of the blank is going to be just like any other particular pen. I start off with a 3/8 bowl gouge. I just have a habit of using this to rough out, cut down the corners, get things running nice and straight. And a few passes with this, finger against the tool rest, keeps the cuts as straight as I possibly can. And I'm really just trying to get this down to round and some of the mass turned away, so I'm getting closer to the final dimensions. And on the bottom of the picture is the nib end. The top of the picture is the clip end of the final pen. I'll start bringing down the ends a little bit. But for shaping and for smoothness of cut, I'm going to get rid of my bowl gouge here in a second and go to my favorite pen turning tool, which I use to complete almost all of my pens. Good enough. Skew chisel, favorite tool for work like this. It leaves a nice smooth surface, allows me to contour a slight curve very easily. And I bring the tip down to the bushing. And on the other end, on the clip end, what I'm going to do is to bring the top portion down to an eighth of an inch or so. It's nothing specific, but I'm going to do it by eye, and I need to leave enough wall thickness that the top portion will not chip out. But an eighth of an inch is more than sufficient when I get this down. So this is all about shaping to be pleasing to the eye. And you see I'm coming down. That's about 1/8 right now, and I probably go a little bit less than that. So a few final cuts. I like to take one last planing cut, the full length if I can. I get a smooth surface. I have few less interruptions that way in the surface. Clean up a couple little spots I don't particularly like, and I'm on to the sanding steps. I'm fortunate enough to have dust collection at most locations in my shop, so for sanding on the lathe, this is my arrangement. Tube doesn't always stay where I want it, but at least it's good enough. I'm using sanding strips, cloth. I allow them to blend across various different portions and make the shape very smooth. I'm starting with 180 grit. I will do 220 and 320. Generally, those 3 grits are adequate. So final sanding with one of the grits. And after I finish each grit, I turn the lathe off, remove any grit that might still remain from the sandpaper, and then sand with the grain horizontally by hand. Takes out any of the swirly marks, circular marks that were put on by the sandpaper in the earlier step. Once all the grits have been gone through, my last is to use the 4/0 steel wool. And if you can see how the shine is coming up instantly, now watch it on the tip. You can see that shine show up. That's because steel wool does not cut like sandpaper. Sandpaper scratches, and we create smaller and smaller scratches. But with steel wool, we are cutting like a plane and creates a much smoother surface. For this demo pen, I'm just using some carnauba wax, very hard, good surface protection. So I put it on, and then I'm going to take a paper towel and just lightly burnish it, and it brings up the shine and completes the lathe work on this particular pen. You can see how the carnauba wax brings that shine up. Okay, that's done. So now let's take it off the lathe. There's my special bushing for the top. Pen kit comes off. There is the base for which I'm going to complete the pen. Now I do my assembly on the lathe also, using these fixtures that I purchased from one of the woodworking dealers. It allows me to align and apply the right amount of pressure very easily using the tailstock quill and the hand crank to easily manipulate the assembly steps. So the nib is going in. It's done. Now on the other end of that same assembly, I have to install the transmission. So back in there with it aligned to the brass tube, which is normally buried in a piece of wood, not in this case. And I'll press that in most of the way, not quite 100% of the distance, because I like to check it. What I'm going to do is to insert the pen refill, extend it all the way down, and see how much is showing through. In this case, none. And then continue to press the transmission in until I've got the reveal exactly what I want. I do not trust that the manufacturers of these kits have maintained a good quality control in terms of some of the lengths of brass tubes and other things that affect that. There it's revealing, but not quite enough yet. So I'll take one more press, but I know exactly how much I want to apply this time. Insert in the transmission. Looks good. That part is done. Now to install the clip in that deep hole requires me to not use the pressure piece, but I'm using a brass rod that will fit down, a steel rod that pushes down in there, and it sets the clip down into place. So there are the assembled pieces, other kits using the same techniques. And you can see I have taken and sanded the top edge of the top back at a slight angle so that it creates an interesting angled approach. So there it is. Well, this is some of the modifications we could try. There are other things we can do with the standard 7mm kit pen, changing tube lengths, modifying components, and so on. It's kind of fun to play around with different ideas. I think I'll try a couple more. See you in the next video.